Hey there, viewers. It's one thing to have the world turn on you, but when your own lawyer starts revealing dark secrets, there's no saving the show. That's exactly what happened to Diddy in court today, and his reaction left everyone stunned. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Man Who Always Had a Plan. I remember the first time I met him. Sean Combs, they called him then. Not Puffy, not Diddy, not any of the other names he'd collect like trophies over the years. Just Sean. He shook my hand like he was giving me a gift, not taking anything. And I guess for a long time I believed he was. Back then, he was the man with the plan. Always 5 steps ahead, always smiling just wide enough to pull you in, but never so wide you could see where the teeth began. He'd glide through courtrooms and back offices like he owned them, leaning on judges like old friends, whispering to lawyers like they were part of some private joke. Nothing touched him because he was too busy moving before it could. I was there through it all. The settlements, the whispers, the sealed deals no one talked about in daylight. My job wasn't to ask questions. It was to stand there, silent, solid, and make sure the pieces on the board stayed right where he wanted them. The office we worked out of looked like the kind of place the world's richest ghosts would hang out. Walls of black marble, polished until you could see your own face stretched across it. White leather couches no one ever sat on. A wet bar that always smelled faintly of brandy even though no one ever poured a glass. You could hear the low thump of bass from the studio downstairs, steady like a heartbeat under your feet, and always the smell of him. Leather, citrus cologne, and something sharper underneath it. Something that reminded me of gun oil. This time, though, something was different. You could feel it in the way the air moved around him. Heavy and too still, like a room waiting for the windows to shatter. He sat behind that massive oak desk, tapping his foot against the ground a little too fast, his fingers drumming out some chaotic rhythm that didn't match the music below. His eyes, usually half-lidded and lazy, flicked around the room like he was trying to find a camera hidden in the walls. I stood where I always stood, just to the right of the door, hands folded in front of me. I didn't say anything. That wasn't my place. "You know they're setting me up, right?" he said suddenly, not even looking at me. His voice was a sharp crack in the silence. "Rats. All of them, chewing through the walls to find a way out." I nodded once. It was the answer he wanted, agreement without question. But inside I felt it too, the difference. It wasn't just the pressure from outside, the lawsuits piling up like sandbags against a breaking dam, the investigators sniffing around the old houses, the rumors crawling through the industry like cockroaches. It was him. He wasn't planning 5 moves ahead anymore. He was trapped, trying to play a game that had moved beyond him. A few hours later, I got the call. One of the lawyers, the main one, the one who'd been glued to Diddy's side since the first storm clouds started gathering, wanted me at the pre-hearing meeting. That was unusual. I didn't sit in on legal strategy. I wasn't paid to think about the law. I was there to move bodies if things got ugly, to watch doors and windows, to make sure he didn't have to think about the physical world when he was busy reshaping reality with a few words and a grin. But when the request came down, it wasn't phrased like an invitation. It was an order. The meeting was set for late in the evening, after most of the office staff had cleared out. The hallways felt different at night. The marble walls seemed to swallow up the sound of your footsteps, and the air tasted stale, like the building itself was holding its breath. I made my way down the long corridor, past the empty reception desk, past the trophy cases filled with platinum records and awards that had started to gather a thin layer of dust. Outside the meeting room, 2 of the younger security guys stood stiffly by the door, eyes forward, hands clasped in front of them. A third guard, one of the old hands I trusted, gave me a look as I approached. A look that said, "This isn't like before." I knocked once and I waited. The door opened a crack, just enough for the lawyer to look out, scan the hall behind me, then jerk his head for me to come in. Inside, the air was thick. The blinds were drawn tight over the windows. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, one of them flickering every few seconds. At the center of the room, Diddy sat hunched over the conference table, a bottle of water sweating in front of him. His suit jacket was off, his tie loose, his shirt wrinkled like he'd been twisting it in his fists. There were maybe 6 other people in the room, all faces I recognized, all part of the inner circle that had shrunk dramatically over the past few months. No one smiled, no one spoke. The lawyer closed the door behind me, twisting the lock with a sharp click that seemed louder than it should have been. Diddy didn't look up. He was staring at the table, one hand tapping out that same frantic rhythm, the other clenching and unclenching around the bottle. The lawyer cleared his throat, shuffled some papers, and started talking. Words like evidence, unsealed, inadmissible defenses floated around the room, heavy as lead. And then I saw it. The center of the table, right in front of Diddy, was a flash drive, small, black, unmarked except for a strip of masking tape across it, with a single handwritten word. Cassie. My stomach dropped. The lawyer laid it all out, his voice dry and mechanical like he was reading an autopsy report. The footage was real, it was clear, it was worse than anyone had known. And it had been verified, time-stamped, cross-referenced against hotel security records. There was no getting around it, no spinning it into another story. No charm in the world could laugh it off. For a moment, no one breathed. Diddy finally looked up, his eyes locked on the flash drive like it was a snake coiled to strike. Then he laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was sharp and broken, more like a cough dragged through barbed wire. He rasped. That's old news. That's nothing. They got... No one answered. The lawyer kept talking. Details about secondary evidence, other witnesses, old employees ready to flip. And slowly, as the words piled up, Diddy started to unravel. First his foot tapping grew louder, until it was almost a stomp. Then his hands started moving faster, fingers clawing at the water bottle until it burst open, water pooling across the polished wood. Then the shouting started. Wild, disjointed accusations, names I hadn't heard in years, threats against ghosts, promises of retribution against people long buried by time and silence. One of the guards moved toward him, but I raised a hand. No sudden moves, not yet. Diddy slammed his fists against the table so hard the flash drive bounced and skittered across the wood. "You think you can frame me?" he bellowed. "You think you can take down a king with lies?" No one answered, because we all knew. It wasn't lies that were going to bury him. It was the truth. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. The lawyer tried to calm him down, speaking low and fast. One of the assistants started gathering up papers, hands shaking. Someone knocked over a chair. In the middle of it all, Diddy just stood there, breathing hard, his whole body trembling with rage or fear or something worse, something deeper, something primal that had no name. And that's when the second call came. A soft buzz on my phone. On the message. Not the war room, not the usual strategy session. New location. A sealed conference room in the basement. Guards posted outside. No windows. No camera. I looked over at Diddy, red-faced, sweating, muttering to himself, and for the first time in all the years I had stood behind him, I realized something. He wasn't planning 5 moves ahead anymore. He was barely surviving the next 5 minutes. Being in whatever was waiting for us downstairs. It wasn't another plan. It was something else entirely. Chapter 2. The file they couldn't bury. The elevator ride down to the basement felt longer than it should have. Maybe it was just the way the fluorescent lights inside the cab flickered overhead, washing everything in a sickly yellow hue. Maybe it was the way Diddy paced the small space like a caged animal, muttering to himself, fists clenching and unclenching like he was fighting something no one else could see. I stayed silent. That's what I did best. Watch. Wait. Move. When it mattered. When the doors slid open, 2 more guards were waiting. Not ours. Courthouse security. Faces blank, hands resting lightly on their belts where the tasers sat. Diddy didn't even look at them. He just marched down the hallway, shoulders hunched up like he was bracing for a blow. The sealed conference room was colder than I expected. Concrete walls, a table bolted to the floor, no windows, one blinking camera in the corner that I wasn't sure was even recording. Inside, the core team was already waiting, his inner circle, the ones who hadn't jumped ship yet. And at the head of the table, the lawyer, a stack of papers neatly lined up in front of him, laptop open, the glow from the screen making his face look even paler than usual. In the center of the table sat the flash drive, black, small, insignificant looking. But everything about the room told me it wasn't. Diddy pulled out a chair roughly and dropped into it, the legs scraping against the floor with a shriek that set my teeth on edge. He didn't bother buttoning his jacket. His tie hung limp around his neck like a noose. The lawyer didn't waste time. He pushed a folder across the table toward Diddy. Thick, heavy, a weight more than a file. The file they couldn't bury, the lawyer said simply. Diddy gave a short bark of a laugh. No humor in it, just sound. "You got old clips," he said, waving a hand dismissively. Same old, same old. You think they're gonna convict me off some edited club fights and drunk girls talking crazy?" The lawyer shook his head slowly. "It's not just the old clips," he said. His voice was calm, but his hands betrayed him, fingers tapping out a steady beat on the table. "It's new footage, from the same hotel, different angles, clearer audio." He paused. Let that sink in. "You couldn't hear her," he said. "Cassie, screaming, begging." For a second, no one moved. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed louder, casting long, twitching shadows across the table. The air in the room seemed to thicken, growing hotter, heavier. I shifted my stance slightly, trying to stay loose, ready for whatever was coming next. Diddy leaned back in his chair, lips pulling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Man, you don't know Cassie like I do," he said, voice low and dangerous. "That girl could act, could flip a scene in a heartbeat." "Don't mean nothing." No one replied. The lawyer just opened the laptop and clicked a few keys. The screen flickered, loaded a paused frame. It wasn't blurry, it wasn't distant. It was Cassie, all right. And the look on her face wasn't acting. Diddy didn't lean in to look. He kept his body rigid, like even acknowledging the image would make it real. The lawyer closed the laptop without hitting play. He didn't have to. "That's Exhibit 1, he said quietly. "But it gets worse." He pulled another folder from the stack, this one fatter, the papers inside crinkled from handling. "Well, they have timelines," he said. "Bank records, payments made to witnesses, payoff structured as consulting fees, shell companies routed through offshore accounts." The lawyer flipped through the pages, each one landing with a soft slap against the table. "They have testimonies," he continued, "from employees, drivers, assistants. Some of them flipped, gave statements about the freak-offs, about the girls brought in, about the drugs." He glanced up, locking eyes with Diddy. "And about the kids?" The room dropped into absolute silence, feeling invigorated. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Benny's fingers twitched, nails scratching against the underside of the table like he was trying to dig into the wood. They ain't got no kids, he said, voice barely above a whisper. That's a damn lie. The lawyer didn't move. Didn't blink. Maybe not directly, he said, but there are statements. People who say they saw underage girls at parties, that they were told not to ask questions. Diddy surged to his feet, chair clattering to the ground behind him. Oh? Bolsh? He roared, spittle flying from his mouth. They think they can pin that on me. They think they can make me look like that? The guards by the door stiffened, hands drifting toward their belts. I took a step forward, positioning myself between Diddy and the others, palms open, non-threatening. Diddy grabbed the water pitcher from the table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the far wall, shards of glass skittering across the concrete floor. He screamed, a raw, animal sound, not words, just rage given voice. Then he spun on the lawyer, jabbing a finger at him. You said you had this locked down, he bellowed. You said none of this would come out. The lawyer stood his ground. I said we could fight it, he said. I never said we could erase it. Diddy sagged suddenly, all the fight bleeding out of him. He stumbled back into his chair, rubbing his face with both hands, breathing hard. The smell of sweat filled the room, thick and sour. No one spoke. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a door slammed. The sound echoed down the concrete halls, a sharp punctuation mark to the disaster unfolding here. The lawyer waited until Diddy's breathing slowed, until the room settled into a heavy, exhausted silence. Then he leaned forward, voice dropping to almost a whisper. And that, he said, tapping the stack of files lightly with one finger, isn't even the worst part. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. Because whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be something we could fight in a courtroom. It was going to be something no one could walk away from. Chapter 3. The Other Tapes. The next day, they called another meeting. No grand offices this time. No glass walls, no city views. Just a cold, windowless room in a downtown storage facility that smelled like mildew and forgotten promises. I followed Diddy and the others through the hallways, the concrete floors stained and cracked beneath our feet. Overhead, the fluorescent lights buzzed so loud it felt like a swarm of bees trapped inside my skull. No one spoke. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional metallic clank of a distant storage door being slammed shut. The lawyer led us to a unit tucked at the far end, one without any identifying marks. Two more guards stood outside, faces tight, hands twitching near their belts. Inside, it was colder, not from air conditioning, from something else, the kind of cold that gets into your bones before you realize it's there. In the middle of the room sat a battered folding table, a dusty TV with a built-in VCR perched on top, and a single cardboard box. The lawyer gestured to the box, recovered from the Westwood property. He said, voice clipped, hidden behind a false wall in the guest house. We believe it was meant for insurance. I stared at it, a regular box, torn at the edges, no markings except for red initials scrawled in thick marker on the sides. No names, just letters, dozens of them. I remembered nights spent loading boxes just like this one. Quiet missions after the parties were over, after the guests had been paid and sent away. Me and a couple others hauling them down the back stairs, slipping them into vans under the cover of darkness. Diddy called it cleaning house. Back then, I never asked what was inside. I didn't want to know. Now, I wished I still didn't. The lawyer pulled a tape from the box, slid it into the VCR. The machine whirred, coughing dust. The screen flickered, fuzzed, then settled into an image. The footage was raw, grainy, no date stamp, no credits. A party scene. Familiar faces, blurred by time and drugs. Models draped across velvet couches, their movements loose and sluggish. Men laughing, their voices distorted by the cheap microphone. And in the background, unmistakable, was Diddy's voice, clear as day. "Line 'em up. Make 'em smile. We get the best shots when they're loose." I felt my stomach knot, my fists clenched without me realizing it. The camera panned clumsily across the room, capturing glimpses of two young faces, girls that didn't look old enough to drive, much less drink, slurring their words, stumbling, glassy-eyed. Heard Diddy again, chuckling low. "You know how it is," he said. "They all want to be stars, just gotta show 'em the way." The footage jumped, fuzzed out for a second, then resumed. A different room now. Dim lighting, bodies writhing, music pounding like a heartbeat. And at the center of it all, Diddy, shirtless, wild-eyed, arms thrown around two girls who couldn't have been more than 16 if that. He wasn't hiding, wasn't ashamed, he was reveling in it. I forced myself to watch, every second. Because looking away felt like betrayal too, like pretending I hadn't stood in those hallways, like pretending I hadn't been a part of it. When the tape ended, the room stayed silent for a long time. No one moved. No one breathed. Diddy leaned back in his chair, a strange high-pitched laugh bubbling out of him. "Fake," he said. "Deep fakes, man. CGI, you know how easy it is now. They can make anything look real." He wiped at his mouth with the back of his hand, smearing sweat across his face. The lawyer said nothing, just ejected the tape, set it aside, and pulled another from the box. "This one's worse," he said quietly. Diddy didn't even flinch. He was somewhere else now, rocking slightly in his chair, eyes unfocused, mumbling under his breath. They played another tape, and another, each one more sickening than the last. Different nights, different girls, different atrocities, but always the same voice in the background, always the same king directing his kingdom. I felt something inside me start to break, a crack running straight through the center of who I thought I was. I'd told myself for years that I was just doing a job, just following orders, that none of it was on me. Watching those tapes, I realized how many nights I must have walked right past those rooms, how many times I must have looked the other way. And for what? A paycheck? A sense of belonging? Loyalty to a man who'd built his empire on broken lives and silent screams? Yet a falsehood. Diddy laughed again, a wet, choking sound. Then he slammed his fist down on the table, making the TV jump and the picture flicker. "This is a setup," he roared. "You hear me? A setup. The ops, they've been laying for me since day one." He pushed up from his chair so fast it toppled backward, clattering against the concrete floor. He started pacing, fast and jerky, like a marionette with frayed strings. "They sent rats into my house. They spiked the drinks. They paid those little lying bitches to cry on cue." He spun toward the lawyer, finger jabbing the air. "And you sit here, playing their fucking tapes, like they're gospel. You supposed to be my shield." The lawyer kept his face blank, but I could see the slightest tremor in his hands as he slid the next tape into the player. Another screen full of darkness. Another parade of memories we all wished we could forget. Diddy collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The room filled with the sound of muffled sobbing, harsh, ragged, coming from him. I stood frozen, watching a man who had once commanded rooms with a glance, now reduced to a broken heap, clawing at his own face, smearing tears and snot and spit into a mask of misery. I didn't know whether to feel sorry for him or disgusted. Maybe both. The tape ended with a flat buzz. The screen turned blue. No one moved to turn it off. And that's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, Diddy turned his head, not toward us, but toward the empty corner of the room. He smiled. A terrible, cracked smile. And he started whispering. "They think this is it," he said. "They think the tapes are the end. But they don't know. They don't see. The real problem's still out there." He chuckled softly, almost sweetly. Still waiting. Still hungry. I stared at him, my blood turning to ice. Because he wasn't talking to us. He was talking to something we couldn't see. Chapter 4. The Swinger's Defense. The next time they called a meeting, it wasn't in any office. It wasn't even in the building. They moved us down into the underground parking bunker 4 levels below street level, tucked behind a set of iron doors that needed 2 different key cards to open. It was the kind of place you'd use if you thought someone was listening. The kind of place where sound felt heavier, where the air sat dead against your skin. I didn't like it the moment we stepped out of the elevator. The walls were bare concrete, sweat duck in places. Pipes ran along the ceiling, rattling quietly. The smell hit me first. Old oil, burnt rubber, stale coffee gone sour in forgotten mugs. Diddy didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he just didn't care anymore. He was already pacing when I caught up with him, head down, muttering to himself. There were maybe 5 or 6 people gathered around a folding table set up in the middle of the bunker. No fancy chairs here, just old metal ones that screeched against the concrete when you moved them. Someone had dragged in a whiteboard, already filled with scribbled notes and angry red marker. At the head of the table, the lawyer was waiting. Beside him, a second chair sat empty. It was supposed to be for Diddy, but Diddy didn't sit. He prowled the edges of the room like a tiger trapped in too small a cage, shoulders twitching with every step, fingers flexing and curling at his sides. The lawyer cleared his throat and started talking, voice clipped, businesslike. The new strategy was simple, desperate but simple. Frame it all as consensual. Spin the freak-offs as lifestyle choices. Paint the accusers as opportunists, people who had agreed to a certain world and then turned on him when it suited them. Normalize the drugs, the parties, the blurred lines. Make it seem glamorous. Make it seem like everyone was there because they wanted to be. There would be no outright denial of everything. That ship had sailed. The footage, the testimony. It was too much to pretend it had never happened. Instead, they would reframe it. Context was everything. They even had talking points ready, neatly printed sheets passed around the table like hymnals. Phrases like, "It was a consensual adult lifestyle." What happened was between adults who understood the culture they were entering. Or we were living life without judgment, not committing crimes. I watched Diddy out of the corner of my eye, watched him pace, watched him flinch every time the overhead pipes rattled. He wasn't hearing them. Or if he wasn't processing it. One of the junior staffers spoke up, nervously suggesting that Diddy should show some vulnerability if he ended up testifying. "Not too much," the lawyer added quickly. "Just enough to seem human. A little shame over the parties, a little regret, but firm on consent." They even started coaching him on how to cry. Or to pause. Adam let his voice catch just slightly when talking about the betrayals of people he had once trusted. It was like watching a director rehearse an actor for a part they both knew he couldn't play anymore. Diddy stopped pacing long enough to grab a chair and hurl it across the room. It crashed against the concrete wall with a hollow bang, tipping over onto its side. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked surprised. The lawyer kept talking, voice steady. "We'll need to acknowledge some drug use. Casual, recreational, voluntary." He ticked off the points like a grocery list. Never forced, never coerced. Diddy was scratching at his arms now, long, angry red marks trailing down his skin where his nails dug in. His shirt was damp with sweat, clinging to his back in patches. He kept clearing his throat again and again, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the concrete. I could see the others starting to shift in their seats, uncomfortable, pretending to focus on their notes but really watching him out of the corners of their eyes. There was something wrong with him, worse than before. It wasn't just the anger anymore. It was fear, and not fear of jail. Fear of something else, something bigger. It was something coming. The smell in the room grew thicker, a stew of sweat, printer toner, burnt coffee, and the sharp ammonia bite of fear. It coated the back of my throat, made me want to gag. The lawyer finally addressed him directly, keeping his tone soft, almost parental. "We'll walk you through it step by step," he said. "We'll control the narrative, frame you as a misunderstood figure, someone who got swept up in excess, not criminality." Diddy didn't answer. He just kept pacing, kept flinching every time someone shifted in their seat or the pipes creaked overhead. The air felt tighter with every minute, like the walls themselves were inching closer. I wiped my palms against my pants, realizing for the first time that I was sweating too. And then it happened. Mid-sentence, while the lawyer was outlining possible jury questions, Diddy stopped dead. He turned, slow and deliberate, and fixed his eyes on the lawyer. Something cold and alien glinted there. "You," he said, voice low and guttural. "You think I don't see it?" The lawyer frowns. "You think I don't know you flipped?" Diddy hissed, taking a step forward. "You're the F-gen mole." The room exploded into chaos. Chairs scraping back, people standing, guards moving. Diddy lunged across the table, knocking papers and laptops flying. He growled at the lawyer, hands clawing at his jacket, dragging him halfway across the tabletop before two of the guards managed to wrestle him back. He fought like a man possessed, kicking, spitting, screaming. "You set me up," he roared. "You sold me out." It took 3 men to drag him away from the table, pinning his arms behind his back, forcing him into a chair. "Even pin," he thrashed, head snapping back and forth, eyes wild. The lawyer straightened his jacket silently, face pale but composed. No one said anything for a long time. The only sounds were Diddy's ragged breathing and the faint, mocking rattle of the pipes overhead. And somewhere, underneath it all, something else. A whisper. Not from the people in the room, from the walls themselves. As if the building was remembering everything he had ever done and was getting ready to speak. Chapter 5. The Leaked Confession. The news broke 3 days before the trial. I was standing in the kitchen of Diddy's penthouse, nursing a cup of burnt coffee when I heard the first sirens outside. At first I thought it was just the usual background noise of the city, but then my phone buzzed, and kept. Screens lit up like a battlefield. Flashes of headlines, blurred images, breaking banners, witness statements, leaked apes, partial confessions. Some of it came from real news outlets, some of it from places so shady they barely qualified as rumor mills. But it didn't matter. In this world, once the first crack appeared, the whole dam usually broke. The footage that leaked wasn't full tapes. It was chopped up, fragmented, like someone had taken scissors to the timeline and tossed the pieces into the air. One clip showed a dimly lit room, candles everywhere flickering in the dark. Another showed people in masks, their faces blank and expressionless, standing in a perfect circle around a makeshift altar. And in the center of it all, the girls, silent, motionless, lined up like dolls waiting to be picked. The networks blurred their faces, tried to scrub the worst of it, but you could still feel it, the wrongness. It seeped through the screen, made your skin crawl. They didn't have to say it outright. The implication was enough. This wasn't just parties and drugs anymore. This was something darker, something ritualistic. That he didn't come out of his bedroom for 2 days after the leaks started. No security, no managers, no assistants buzzing in and out with schedules and phones and urgent whispers. Just me. Not because I wanted to be there. Because I didn't know how to leave. Felt like watching a ship go down, knowing you were tied to the mast. The penthouse had become a tomb. The air was thick with old sweat and sour cologne. Half-eaten trays of food sat molding on every surface. The curtains were drawn tight, the lights dimmed to the lowest setting. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, clearing plates, replacing batteries and the flashlights he insisted on keeping in every corner now. He didn't trust the lights anymore, said the cameras were hidden in them, said the shadows moved when he wasn't looking. He wasn't wrong. The place did feel alive sometimes. Reflections would shift in the mirrors when you passed. Whispers would curl up out of the vents when the heat kicked on. Maybe it was just the way fear changes the way you hear things. Maybe it was something worse. Diddy refused to eat unless he opened the food himself. He made me stand across the room when delivery came, arms folded, watching while he peeled back the foil seals and sniffed the contents like a rat testing for poison. He barely slept. When he did, it wasn't real sleep. It was a twitching, jerking thing, filled with soft moans and muttered curses. Sometimes he'd wake up screaming, clawing at the sheets like they were trying to strangle him. There was no fixing it anymore. No spin, no charm offensive. Whatever walls he had built to keep the world out and himself in had cracked, and everything he had buried was leaking out now, thick and black and impossible to ignore. Late one night, when the city outside had quieted into that strange dead space between midnight and dawn, I heard a noise from the hall, a scraping, rustling sound. At first I thought maybe he'd finally decided to leave the bedroom, but when I stepped out I saw the door to the walk-in closet hanging open, and there he was, curled up in the corner of the closet like a wounded animal, clutching a broken cell phone to his chest. His knees were pulled up to his chin, his face was slick with sweat, his lips were moving, fast and feverish, like he was praying or cursing, or maybe both. I crouched down slowly, trying not to spook him. I caught a few words. "They want my crown," he was whispering, rocking back and forth. "But they can't wear it. Can't wear it without bleeding." His fingers tightened around the shattered phone until his knuckles went white. "They think it's easy. They think they can just take it, but they don't know. They don't know what it costs." Henderson, Texas. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't anything to say. I just sat there for a long time, listening to him mutter and rock and shake, feeling the darkness thicken around us like a living thing. And then the knock came. Not loud, not urgent. His 3 sharp raps against the front door. I stood up slowly, heart hammering in my chest. But he didn't even seem to hear it. He just kept rocking, whispering to the broken phone. I moved toward the door, feet dragging like they were wrapped in chains. When I looked through the peephole, my stomach dropped. Men in suits, badges flashing in the hallway light. Government agents. Another warrior. Another nail in the coffin. Another crack in the dam about to give way. Chapter 6. The Courtroom Mirage. The federal courthouse looked like every other building in the city from the outside. All clean lines and stone and glass. But stepping inside felt like sinking into a different world entirely. Everything smelled like old wood polish and stale recycled air. The ceilings hung lower than they should have, like the whole place was leaning in, waiting to hear secrets it could swallow whole. Security was tighter than I'd ever seen. Metal detectors, wands, dogs, uniformed marshals with grim faces standing like statues at every corner. Inside the main courtroom it was packed. Journalists sat crammed elbow to elbow on the benches closest to the aisle, their eyes hungry, pens clicking softly like insects tapping against glass. Former friends filled a few rows, The ones who hadn't jumped ship yet, or maybe the ones who thought showing up would somehow save their own skins. And behind them, scattered and silent, were the survivors. No signs, no outbursts, just quiet, just presence. Oh, that was louder than anything. I found a spot near the back wall, standing room only. Didn't sit, couldn't sit. My body was too wired, too tense, like it already knew what was coming. Diddy entered through a side door, flanked by 2 guards and a defense team. I barely recognized him. The man who once walked into every room like he owned the air itself was gone. In his place was something bloated, pale, and jittery. His face was puffy, like he hadn't slept in weeks. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit. He chain-shifted in his seat, legs bouncing, fingers tapping, neck twitching. Eyes darted around the room constantly, at the benches, at the walls, at the floor, anywhere but the judge's bench. The first hour was procedural. Motions entered into record, jury instructions, housekeeping stuff. And then the testimonies began. They started slow, deliberate. Witnesses came up, one after another, each voice more devastating than the last. Assistants, drivers, former employees. Each story chipped away at the carefully constructed image he'd built for decades. Each detail another crack in the mirror. Descriptions of parties where the lines blurred until consent became a word no one said anymore. Descriptions of money changing hands to buy silence. Descriptions of girls, younger than they should have been, dressed in glitter and fear, paraded like trophies. The judge maintained order, but barely. The room pulsed with a tension so thick you could chew it. The recycled air tasted sour. The polished wood of the benches had soaked in too many bodies, too much sweat and fear. Everything smelled wrong. And Diddy sat there, shrinking minute by minute. He whispered to himself occasionally, just little things at first, phrases I couldn't make out. The bailiff shot him a warning glance once or twice, but he didn't seem to notice. Then came Cassie's deposition. Even though she wasn't physically there, her voice filled the courtroom through the recording. Strong at first, then trembling. A woman trying to stitch herself back together while describing how she was pulled apart. They read aloud old text messages next. Facelift messages Diddy had sent her. "You're nothing without me. You'll take it and smile. You do what this will." The words hung in the air like smoke, curling into every corner, blackening the walls. I saw Diddy flinch at the first one. At the second, he hunched forward, his face folding in on itself. At the third, he broke. He started muttering loud enough for those around him to hear. "Oh, no, that's not what it meant." She knew the rules. The prosecutor tried to continue, reading another line. Diddy interrupted, louder this time. "Lies. She's lying. You don't know what it was like." His lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically, trying to quiet him down. But it was like trying to dam a flood with bare hands. Diddy rocked in his seat, muttering, babbling now. Half memories, half curses, words running together into a slurry of rage and terror. The judge called a recess. The bailiffs moved in fast, surrounding Diddy, ushering him toward the back. He went limp suddenly, slumping in their grip like a puppet with its strings cut. They half walked, half dragged him into the recess chamber, a small, cold room behind the main courtroom. I followed at a distance, just close enough to hear the door slam shut behind them. Inside, Diddy collapsed onto a bench, staring at the floor, chest heaving. The lawyer crouched in front of him, speaking low and fast, trying to rebuild whatever shredded barrier had cracked open in front of everyone. And then, slowly, Diddy lifted his head. He looked at the mirror on the wall, one of those fake mirrors that was really a window for observation, and smiled. A terrible, broken smile. "You're not me," he said softly. "You're the shell they built to bury me." No one moved. No one spoke. The fluorescent lights above flickered once. And somewhere deep inside the building, like a bone-deep hum, something shivered away. Chapter 7. Collapse. They moved him to the private medical wing a few hours after the meltdown in court. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Too many outbursts. Many eyes watching. Too many whispers, starting to circle like vultures smelling blood. They said it was for observation. They said it was just precautionary. But we all knew better. The courthouse medical wing wasn't much to look at. A strip of tiled floor, a row of pale green curtains, a few battered gurneys. A place built for heart attacks and fainting jurors, not for collapsing kings. They gave him a sedative strong enough to drop a bull. Wheeled him into a holding cell with a hospital bed bolted to the floor. Monitors beeped sluggishly, the sound sluggish and tired, like even the machines didn't want to be there. The fluorescent lights above flickered at random, buzzing low and mean. The whole place smelled like antiseptic, and something sourer underneath, fear soaked into the walls, too old to scrub away. I sat on a metal folding chair outside the cell, watching him through the narrow glass window. Didn't bother to check my phone. Didn't talk to the guards. Just watched. Watched the man I used to think was untouchable shrink into something smaller than the bed that held him. This wasn't a fall from grace. It wasn't even a crash. It was a slow, rotting collapse. An empire clinging to a corpse, trying to pretend it still had breath left in it. I remembered how he used to walk into studios, into courtrooms, into meetings. Head high, smile loaded like a weapon. A man who could convince you the sky was green if he talked long enough. Now he was just a body. A twitching, sweating body wrapped in 1,000 broken promises and 1,000,000,000 broken dreams. Hours passed like that. Just the beep of the monitors. Just the buzz of the light. Just the sound of him breathing, ragged and wet. Then something shifted. He twitched harder. His hands jerked at the sheets like he was trying to tear them apart. His head lolled to one side, eyes half-lidded but moving frantically. I stood up, moving to the glass. He started mumbling. At first, it was just words. "No, not me, not me." Then, louder. "Don't look. Don't show them. They'll see. They'll know." And then he screamed. It was a scream of recognition. Like he was seeing something he had spent his whole life trying not to see. He sat bolt upright, tearing at the monitors, ripping the IV out of his arm. Blood splattered across the sheets, bright and surreal under the buzzing lights. He stumbled to the mirror bolted into the wall, slammed his palms against it, breathing hard, eyes wide and wild. And then he started to talk. But it wasn't just him. The words tangled together, voices overlapping in his throat. Different pitches, different people, as if all the echoes from all the tapes were crawling up out of him, fighting for space. "You said you loved me. Just for the picture, just for the room, just for the noise. Please, not again. You promised. You built it on a..." He slammed his forehead against the mirror once, twice, leaving a red smear across the glass. "I didn't mean to lose them," he sobbed, voice cracking into pieces. "I just wanted to be louder than what they did to me." The guards rushed in, restraining him, pinning him back to the bed, reattaching wires and straps. I stayed outside, staring through the glass, heart hammering against my ribs. And I wondered, not for the first time, if the man I had followed for all those years had ever really existed at all. Or if he had always just been hunger and fear and rage, wrapped up in silk suits and hit songs. A hollow thing, built for noise, addicted to the sound of his own survival. Hours later, when the wing had settled into uneasy quiet again, I overheard the defense team talking down the hall. They spoke in low voices, urgent and clipped. Words like incompetent, words like fitness to stand trial, words like withdrawal of representation. They were trying to figure out how to get away from him without getting dragged under with him. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure if they were too late. Chapter 8. The Last Defense. It's strange how things just stop. Not with a bang, not with a final word shouted into a crowded courtroom. It's with paperwork. A judge, a doctor's report, a few signatures scrawled across the bottom of a motion. And just like that, it was over. The trial never finished. They ruled Diddy mentally unfit to fully participate in his own defense. Civil suits broke off in different directions. Criminal investigations forked and twisted like dying branches. The headlines cooled, but the rot stayed. The cases piled up like bodies no one wanted to bury properly. He wasn't declared innocent. He wasn't declared guilty either. He just disappeared. Months later, I found myself standing outside the old penthouse again. Turns I didn't know why. Maybe some part of me thought there would be answers inside. The building had gone to hell. Pipes leaking through the drywall, leaving brown stains like bruises across the ceilings. Mold blooming in corners where sunlight used to stream in. Dust layering over everything like snowfall. I pushed the door open. It groaned on its hinges, the sound echoing into the empty halls. Inside it was a graveyard. The living room still had the skeletons of furniture, couches covered in drop cloths, tables missing legs. Trophies lined the shelves, forgotten. Gold records, platinum plaques, awards from nights no one wanted to remember anymore. There were kids' toys, too, scattered along the floor like a crime scene. Plastic cars, stuffed animals, a tiny sneaker left upside down in the hallway. No one had bothered to pack them up. No one had come back for them. I moved through the wreckage slowly, breathing shallow to keep from inhaling the damp rot hanging in the air. Every step echoed like a question. Every room felt smaller than it used to. At the end of the hall, I found a door I didn't recognize. Twice heavy reinforced. The deadbolt, rusted shut. But someone, maybe him, maybe someone cleaning up after him, had left the bolt half thrown, the latch loose. It swung open with a sharp creak. Inside was a small room, barely big enough to turn around in. A single chest sat against the far wall. Old wooden, the surface carved with swirling patterns that meant nothing. And scrawled across the lid in thick black marker were the words, "But when they forget me." My mouth went dry. I crossed the room, heart hammering, and knelt in front of it. The lock was broken. Hanging loose, rust flaking away in my fingers. I lifted the lid. Inside was chaos. Scraps of paper, torn lyric sheets, unfinished songs scribbled in frantic handwriting, Polaroids, party scenes, arms thrown around shoulders, drinks raised high, grins too wide, love notes, some pages barely legible, stained with what looked like spilled champagne or worse, and at the bottom a folder. I hesitated, then pulled it out. Inside were pages, dozens of them, lists, names, pages, dates, no explanation, no context. F-backs, out and simple. Damn me. I flipped through them with numb fingers, the weight of it settling heavy on my chest. This wasn't a defense file. This wasn't evidence meant for a courtroom. This was a confession, not for justice, for memory. A record not meant to clear his name, but to preserve it in whatever twisted form he thought mattered. A final attempt to control the story even as it rotted away around him. I stood there for a long time, staring down at the pile of wreckage he had left behind. Not just the papers, not just the penthouse. Everything. His life, his legacy, his noise. He hadn't been fighting for innocence. He had been fighting to outlast the truth. To drown it. To rewrite it faster than it could bleed out. And in the end, it hadn't been the courts that beat him. It hadn't been the witnesses. It hadn't been the tapes or the headlines. It had been history itself. It had been the simple, stubborn persistence of memory. As I closed the lid of the chest and stepped back into the ruined penthouse, I realized the thing none of us had seen clearly until it was too late. They thought the trial was about justice, but it was really about history, about whether he could erase it faster than it could bleed out.